The bucket of filthy, ice-cold toilet water hit Aaliyah Carter with a sound that silenced the glittering room, a shocking, public drenching that dripped from her elegant silk blouse onto the $10 billion contract laid out on the mahogany table. Gasps sliced through the hushed atmosphere of the Viridian, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, now a stage for unimaginable humiliation. Dozens of smartphones were raised, their screens capturing the cruel spectacle as the dirty water pooled around the heels of her designer shoes. David Reynolds stood before her, holding the now empty plastic bucket, a smirk of profound satisfaction twisting his features. He had arrived 15 minutes earlier, expecting to meet the legendary, elusive CEO of Carter Global Holdings, a titan known only as Carter. He'd pictured a graying, seasoned captain of industry. Instead, his eyes had found a stunning black woman, maybe 35, waiting calmly at the reserved summit table. Her poise, her elegant braids coiled in a sophisticated crown, the undeniable aura of ownership she projected. He had immediately dismissed it as pretension. A junior executive, perhaps an assistant who'd overstepped. His deeply ingrained bias wrote a story his ego could accept. She was in the way. "Can I help you?" Aaliyah had asked, her voice a smooth, low contralto when he'd first approached, looking past her. "You can fetch the real decision-maker," David had retorted, his voice dripping with condescension. "And while you're at it, the men's room could use attention. This one's got a bit of an overflow. Be a dear and bring a mop bucket to take care of it." A young, horrified busboy had been coerced by David's booming "now" into providing the bucket from the service closet. The room had watched, a mix of frozen shock and morbid fascination, as David carried it, slushing, to the table. A little baptism to wash away the audacity. He chuckled to a colleague nearby, who gave an uneasy laugh. And then he'd poured it. The water darkened her cream blouse, beaded on her lashes, and soaked the document that held the future of his company. Aaliyah did not flinch. She did not cry out. She simply closed her eyes for a long second as a liquid trickled down her neck. Inside, a cold, crystalline fury was forging itself into a weapon. But outside, she was stillness incarnate. She opened her eyes, meeting David's triumphant gaze, while around them, the whispers erupted. "Oh my God! Did he just? Is she okay? This is going viral for sure." David set the bucket down with a clatter. "Maybe now you'll know your place," he said, leaning in, his voice low enough for only her to hear, yet loud enough for the closest phones to catch. "This is a world for builders, not for climbers who dress up for the part." Aaliyah slowly reached for a pristine linen napkin from the table. She blotted her face, her movements deliberate, regal even in devastation. The silence stretched, thick with anticipation. What would she do? Scream? Cry? Run? She did none of those things. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer, which was miraculously still dry, and pulled out her phone. Her thumb moved once. She put the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving David's. "Marcus," she said, her voice clear, steady, and carrying across the dead-quiet room. "We have a situation at the Viridian, the Reynolds account, code black." She paused, listening. A faint, savage smile touched her lips for a millisecond. "No, not a negotiation, an execution. And bring the car around. I'm indisposed." She ended the call. The word execution hung in the air. David's smirk faltered, just for a moment, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Who was she calling? What code black? This wasn't the reaction he'd scripted. Trying to scare someone. "Sweetheart," he boomed, recovering, playing to the audience. "Calling your daddy? Your boss? Tell him David Reynolds doesn't negotiate with the help." Aaliyah finally spoke directly to him, her voice a blade sheathed in silk. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, placing her ruined napkin on the table. "In approximately 90 seconds, you are going to understand profound depth of your error, and for the rest of your life, you will remember the cost of a moment's cruelty." The phones kept recording. The crowd held its breath. The clock had started. 90 seconds. David Reynolds scoffed, the sound loud in the breathless quiet. He rocked back on his heels, savoring the spectacle he created. The great Carter was late, and this imposter was putting on a last-ditch performance. He turned to the small cluster of his own junior executives, who looked pale and uncertain. "See this?" he announced, his voice projecting for the entire restaurant. "This is what happens when you let affirmative action run wild. They get a nice suit, a fancy title, and think they can sit at tables built by real work, by real sacrifice." Aaliyah remained standing, a statue of dignified composure amidst the wreckage. She carefully unclasped her silk blazer, revealing the drenched silk beneath, and draped the jacket over the back of her chair. Each movement was deliberate, unhurried, a silent counterpoint to David's blustering theatrics. She didn't look at the recording phones. She looked through David, as if he were a pane of dainty glass. "You think your little phone call intimidates me?" David chuckled, pulling out his own phone. He mimed dialing. "Hello, Carter Global? Yeah. Put me through to the actual CEO. Tell him his diversity hire is making a scene at the Viridian and has ruined a $10 billion contract." He winked at a nearby waiter, who took a step back in disgust. The laughter from David's sycophants was thin, strained. Inside, David's mind raced. This wasn't going exactly as planned. He'd expected tears, frantic apologies, her scrambling to clean up the mess. Her eerie calm was unnerving. But his ego, a fortress built on privilege and unchecked success, refused to consider the unthinkable, that she was a fortress. He reassured himself. He'd done his research. Carter was reclusive, press-shy, a legend. This woman, she was too young, too beautiful, too black. The math of his prejudice didn't add up. Aaliyah's internal monologue was a stark contrast, a cold, precise calculation. Water, 22 degrees Celsius. Chlorine-based cleaner. Traces of organic matter. Blouse. Ruined. Contract. Clause 7B. Moral turpitude of signing party permits, unilateral termination. Audio-visual evidence. Secured by 12-plus bystander devices. Damage. Contained. Opportunity. Pristine. Her eyes flickered toward the restaurant's grand entrance. A subtle shift in the light. A change in the host's posture. They were here. David, seeing her glance, misread it as desperation. "Looking for security to throw you out, honey? Don't worry. I'll handle it." He turned and raised a hand, snapping his fingers at the restaurant manager who had been hovering, horrified. "You, manager, this woman is harassing a paying guest and damaging property. Have her removed immediately." The manager, a man named Laurent who had personally overseen the setup for the Carter Reynolds signing, stared at David as if he'd just been asked to set the building on fire. His gaze shifted to Aaliyah, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. It was a tiny gesture, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. I am afraid I cannot do that, sir," Laurent said, his voice quavering but firm. "What did you say?" David's face flushed crimson. Before David could explode, the main doors swung open, not with a crash, but with a silent, pressurized sweep. 3 people entered, moving with the lethal grace of a special ops team. In the lead was Marcus Thorne, Aaliyah's chief of operations. Tall, immaculate in a dark suit, his eyes scanned the room and found his EO, dripping, humiliated, yet radiating an iron will. His expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. The second was a woman carrying a sleek, waterproof garment bag and a small medical kit. The third was a man with a security earpiece and a demeanor that cleared a path without a word being spoken. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. All phone cameras swiveled to capture this new development. The suspense was palpable, a live wire humming in the air. Marcus went straight to Aaliyah, ignoring David completely. He leaned in, his voice too low for the microphones. "Medical." "I'm fine, Marcus," Aaliyah replied, her voice still steady. "The contract is a patient. Prognosis, terminal." David watched, his confidence cracking. "And who are you supposed to be?" "The cleanup crew," he jeered, but the bravado was fading, replaced by a dawning, cold dread. Marcus finally turned to him. He didn't speak. He simply looked at David for a long, terrifying 3 seconds, his gaze one of pure, unadulterated assessment, as one would view a bug on a slide. Then he reached into his breast pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a single embossed card. He held it up so David and the cameras could see clearly. It was a business card. On it, in sharp, minimalist font, it read, Aaliyah Carter, founder and CEO, Carter Global Holdings. Below was the iconic CG logo, a stylized lioness. The cleanup crew, Marcus stated, his voice finally cutting through the silence like a guillotine, has arrived, Mr. Reynolds. But we're not here for the water. He dropped the card. It fluttered through the air, landing face up in the puddle of dirty water at David's feet. The embossed card landed with a soft, wet plop, the Carter Global Holdings logo darkening as it soaked in the water he had thrown. David Reynolds stared at it, the letters blurring, his brain refusing to process the information. Aaliyah Carter. The Carter, the architect of the Phoenix Array, the woman who'd revolutionized sustainable infrastructure on 3 continents. The partner his board had begged him to secure for a decade. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The restaurant, which had been holding a collective breath, erupted into a vortex of whispers. The phone camera zoomed in on his crumbling expression, then panned to Aaliyah, who was now being attended to by her assistant. The woman with a garment bag produced a stunning, tailored blazer of deep emerald green, shielding Aaliyah as she changed out of her soaked blouse right there, an act of practical reclamation that felt like a queen donning her armor. This is a mistake, David finally stammered, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at Aaliyah. A prank? You're an actress. This is a sabotage play from Sterling Corp. His mind clawed for any explanation that wasn't the catastrophic truth. Marcus Thorne didn't engage. He simply picked up the waterlogged, ink-smudged contract from the table. He held it by a corner, dripping. Clause 7B, he said, his voice cool and forensic. Moral turpitude. Defined as conduct violating community standards of justice, honesty, or good morals. The act of a signing party assaulting the counterparty with biohazardous material in a public forum during negotiations would, I believe, satisfy any court's definition. He looked at David. Your signature was to go here, was it not, Mr. Reynolds? David, senior vice president, a man named Robert who had been silently horrified throughout, finally found his voice. David, for God's sake, apologize. Now. But it was too late. The script had flipped. Aaliyah, now in the fresh, powerful blazer, turned from her assistant. She approached David, not with anger, but with the chilling calm of a surgeon approaching a terminal operation. The crowd watched, utterly mesmerized. This was no longer a humiliation. It was a live corporate execution. You wanted the decision-maker, David, Aaliyah said, her voice carrying perfectly. She didn't need to shout. You are looking at her. You demanded a bucket. You received one. You poured it. And in doing so, you poured away your company's future, your shareholders' trust, and any shred of professional reputation you possessed. David's phone rang in his pocket, the generic trill absurdly loud. He fumbled for it, seeing the caller ID, chairman of the board. His thumb slipped on the screen as he answered. Arthur, listen, there's been a... He didn't get to finish. The voice on the other end was a roar of static and fury, audible even a few feet away. Reynolds, what in the hell have you done? I have a live stream on my desk of you assaulting Aaliyah Carter. The deal is dead. Do you have any concept? Aaliyah nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward. I believe you have other calls to take, Mr. Reynolds. We have business to conclude. Marcus produced a tablet. On it was a simple, formal document titled Termination of Negotiations and Notice of Civil Liability. Carter Global is severing all discussions with Reynolds Capital, effective immediately. Furthermore, we are claiming damages for breach of good faith negotiation, public defamation, and assault. Our legal team will be in contact. Your physical presence is no longer required. The security officer who had entered with Marcus moved to David's side, a silent, immovable force. The message was clear: leave voluntarily or be removed. David looked around. The faces that had held nervous laughter now held scorn, pity, or outright disgust. Lauren, the manager, was already directing waitstaff to clean the floor around Aaliyah, treating her with a reverence bordering on awe. Robert, his own VP, had turned his back, phone presses on air, already in damage control mode. He had come to sign a deal that would make him a legend. In 90 seconds, he had become a pariah, and the evidence was streaming live to the world. As the security officer gently but firmly took his elbow, David's eyes met Aaliyah's one last time. In them, he saw no gloating, no fiery vengeance. He saw only the absolute, unshakable certainty of her power. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. David Reynolds was not so much led as he was ghosted out of the Viridian. The security officer's grip on his elbow was a tourniquet cutting off the circulation of his former life. The once important clicks of his Italian loafers were now the shuffling steps of a condemned man on the polished marble. Every phone was a mirror reflecting his demise. He could hear the frantic, hushed commentary. "That's him. He just lost 10 billion. My feed is blowing up." Outside, under the cruel glare of the afternoon sun, his driver stood waiting by the town car. The man's professional mask faltered, his eyes widening as he took in his employer's ashen face and the spectacle unfolding behind the restaurant's glass walls. David collapsed into the back seat, the smell of the rich leather now sickening. His own phone was a live wire in his hand, buzzing incessantly with notifications, headlines already blaring. "Billion-dollar bigotry." Viral. CEO humiliates counterpart in racist tirade. The video, perfectly framed, was everywhere. Inside the Viridian, a transformation was underway. Laurent, the manager, had become a maestro of redemption. With a snap of his fingers, the soiled tablecloth was whisked away. The ruined contract was bagged as evidence. A new, smaller table was set near the window, with fresh flowers and sparkling water. It was a sovereign space carved out of the chaos. Aaliyah accepted a glass of water from Laurent. "Thank you, Laurent. My apologies for the disruption to your establishment." "Madam Carter," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the apology is ours. What you endured in my restaurant," he looked truly stricken. "The fault lies with one man, not with the Viridian," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She then turned to the young, horrified busboy who had been forced to fetch the bucket. He was hovering near the service door, looking like he might be sick. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice softening. "Miguel," he stammered. "Miguel, you were put in an impossible position. No one should have to choose between their job and their conscience." She glanced at Marcus, who gave a slight nod. "Marcus, please ensure Miguel receives a full scholarship grant from the Carter Global Futures Fund for any institution of his choosing, and ensure he has a position here or anywhere else he prefers, without threat of reprisal." Miguel's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Aaliyah smiled gently. "Just build a future no one can throw water on." The gesture, witnessed and recorded, sent a new wave of emotional resonance through the online viewers. Comments scrolled faster. "Queen behavior." "This is leadership." "He got her wet, she got him set." Meanwhile, in the town car, David's world was dissolving in real time. A video call connected. It was his entire board, their faces a mosaic of apocalyptic rage. The chairman, Arthur Blakely, spoke first, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "The deal is not just dead, David. Carter Global's press release just hit. They are not only terminating with us, but they are publicly announcing a new partnership with our chief competitor, Sterling Corp, to fund the Phoenix Array themselves. They've cited our toxic leadership culture and unacceptable ethical breaches as a reason for the shift." Another board member cut in. "Our stock is in free fall and after-hours trading, down 38% and plunging. The lawsuits are already being drafted by shareholders." "You are fired, effective immediately," Blakely stated, the words final as a hammer blow. "All access is revoked. Your severance is forfeit due to cause. We will be pursuing you for damages. You no longer speak for this company. Do not come to the office. Do not contact anyone." The screen went black. David sat in the silent car, the buzz of his phone now a taunt. He was a billionaire who had just become a billionaire's cautionary tale. He scrolled, seeing his life dismantled in headlines. Then he saw it, a fresh notification. A statement from Carter Global, quoting Aaliyah Carter. "Today, a man tried to use humiliation as a tool of power. He failed. True power cannot be drenched. It is a wellspring itself. Carter Global's mission remains to build a future that lifts everyone up. We will now do so with partners who share that fundamental respect. As for today's events, sometimes you must let a man show you exactly who he is so the world can see it, too. David looked up through the car window and back into the restaurant. He could see Aaliyah, now at the clean table, speaking calmly with Marcus and her team, a portrait of unassailable grace. He was outside in the crumbling noise. She was inside, already rebuilding. The driver, meeting his eyes in the rearview, asked quietly, "Where to, sir?" David Reynolds had no answer. 6 weeks later, the echo of the bucket was still a roar. The incident at the Viridian hadn't just been a viral video. It had become a cultural shorthand, a case study in boardrooms and business schools titled The Reynolds Implosion, The Cost of Bias. David Reynolds no longer lived in his penthouse. The forced sale, to settle the first wave of shareholder lawsuits, had been swift and public. He now sat in a rental condo that smelled of stale air and regret, the blinds permanently drawn against the world. His screen was his only window, and it showed a hell of his own making. The meme was relentless, a split screen. On one side, him, smirking, bucket tilted. On the other, Aaliyah Carter, drenched yet regal, with a caption, "Poor decisions." He was a ghost, haunted by his own digital specter. His professional death was absolute. No firm would touch him. Emails went unanswered. Recruiters' lines went dead. He was a bucket guy, a toxic acid in a world that prized reputation above all. The civil suit from Carter Global for defamation and intentional interference with business relations was a slow, grinding avalanche of legal paperwork, a financial death by 1,000 cuts. Conversely, Aaliyah Carter had ascended from titan to icon. The footage of a quiet dignity, followed by the swift, surgical termination the grace shown to Miguel the busboy, was edited into powerful montages set to anthems of empowerment. She hadn't just won the battle. She had written the moral of the story. Her approval ratings, both public and internal, had skyrocketed. The Carter Global Futures Fund, boosted by a surge of supportive investments, had announced its Phoenix Initiative full funding partnership with Sterling Corp, a deal now valued at $12 billion, 2 more than the original with Reynolds. The poetic justice was not lost on anyone. Tonight, David faced a new circle of hell. He'd been coerced by his remaining, furious family into a televised apology. He sat on a stock set across from a famously unsparing interviewer, Lena Thorne, no relation to Marcus, but the irony was another twist of the knife. The lights were hotter than the restaurant spotlight had been. "Mr. Reynolds," Lena began, her voice cool, "you're here to apologize. But to whom? To Aaliyah Carter, or to the public for getting caught?" David, wearing a suit that no longer fit his shrunken frame, cleared his throat. "To Ms. Carter, of course. My actions were unconscionable, a moment of profound error." "A moment?" Lena repeated, leaning forward. "The video shows a premeditated sequence. You requested the bucket. You waited for it. You delivered a speech. That's a performance, not a moment. Did you see a black woman and immediately assume she couldn't be the person in power?" The directness was a lance. David squirmed. I made assumptions. I was stressed about the deal." "You were arrogant," Lena corrected. "You believed your bias was truth. When you saw the business card, when Marcus Thorne arrived, what was your first, real, honest thought?" The camera zoomed in. Sweat beaded on David's upper lip. He was silent for too long, his mind flashing back to that instant of primal, terrified denial. An actress. A prank. "I thought it couldn't be real," he whispered. The admission dragged from him. "Because a black woman could not possibly be Aaliyah Carter." Lena pressed, her words precise as scalpels. The dam broke, not into tears, but into a pathetic, sputtering justification. "It's the way the world works. You meet a CEO, you expect someone who looks like you," Lena finished for him. "And when the world didn't conform, you tried to punish it into submission. You threw dirty water on a $10 billion deal because it was held in hands you didn't respect." At that exact moment, in her penthouse office, Aaliyah watched the interview on a muted screen. She felt no pity, only a distant, analytical sorrow. She turned to Marcus. He's still not apologizing for the racism. He's apologizing for miscalculating my net worth. On screen, Lena delivered the final blow. She played a new clip on the monitor behind David. It was Miguel, the busboy, in a crisp Carter Global intern polo, speaking from a university campus. Ms. Carter didn't just give me a chance. She showed me that real power is clean. It doesn't have to make others dirty to prove it exists. The contrast was devastating. David, small and soiled in spirit. Miguel, walking in clean light. Lena turned back. Your moment, Mr. Reynolds, didn't just cost you a deal. It exposed the sickness. The market, the public, they've all delivered their verdict. Do you understand? Now, what you actually poured away. David looked into the camera, and for the first time, the arrogance was completely gone, burned away. All that was left was hollow, comprehending ruin. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His face said it all. Aaliyah clicked off the TV. The chapter was closed. Her phone lit up with a message about the Phoenix Initiative's groundbreaking ceremony tomorrow. She was already building the future. He was forever trapped in the past, drowning in the echo of his own decision. 1 year to the day after the drenching of the Viridian, Aaliyah Carter stood on a sun-drenched, empty field that would become the heart of the Phoenix Array. She held a ceremonial shovel, its handle wrapped in green and gold, the colors of Carter Global. Around her stood a diverse cohort of engineers, politicians, community leaders, and the now confident intern, Miguel, in a hard hat. Drones buzzed overhead, broadcasting the event live. This wasn't just a groundbreaking. It was a victory lap built on a foundation of reclaimed dignity. We break ground today. Aaliyah's voice, amplified, rang clear across the field, not just on an energy grid, but on a principle, that the future must be built by all hands, and that those hands deserve respect, not ridicule. The crowd erupted in applause. There was no mention of David Reynolds, but his specter was a negative space that gave her words a powerful shape. Miles away, David watched from the dark cave of his rental. The footage was crisp, professional, a far cry from the shaky, viral phone videos that defined his existence. He saw the confidence in her posture, the easy smile she shared with the Sterling Corp CEO, his former rival, now bathing in the glory David had thrown away. He saw Miguel, not in a busboy uniform, but in a Carter Global fleece, pointing to architectural plans. Each image was a grain of sand in an hourglass measuring his obsolescence. His phone, a cheap burner now, buzzed. A single, vicious text from an unknown number. Hope the view is good from a gutter. Bucket boy. The harassment was intermittent but relentless. He was a punchline that wouldn't fade. At the site, Lena Thorne, the interviewer, was now doing a special feature. She approached Aaliyah after the speech. Ms. Carter, a year after an event that could have defined you, you've instead redefined an industry. Do you ever look back? Aaliyah gazed at the horizon where solar towers would rise. I look back only to measure the distance we traveled. What happened that day was a symptom of an old, dying world. The Phoenix Array is the antidote. We're building something that powers communities, something that can't be knocked over with a bucket of fear and hate. The eloquence was devastating. In his dark room, David winced. Then, Lena asked a question on everyone's mind. Have you heard anything from David Reynolds? Any attempt at a genuine apology? Aaliyah's expression grew contemplative. I received a letter 6 months ago. It was full of explanations, of stress, of competitive pressure, of not being himself. She paused, letting the wind carry her next words to microphones. But an apology that explains is an apology that excuses. I didn't need an explanation. The world saw what it saw. True remorse would have been silence, and the hard work of true change. I have seen neither. The finality of it was absolute. She had not forgiven him, not because she was bitter, but because he had offered nothing to forgive, only excuses. She had moved beyond the need for his remorse. Her currency was progress, not pardon. The broadcast cut to a pre-recorded package, a timeline, the Viridian incident, the stock crash, Carter Global soaring valuation, David's firing, the launch of the Phoenix Initiative. It was a stark, visual narrative of cause and catastrophic effect, set to an inspiring, swelling score that made Aaliyah's journey feel mythic and David seem like a grim fable. As the ceremony concluded, Aaliyah thrust a shovel into the earth. The dirt was rich, dark, and fertile. Cameras captured the moment, not just the act, but the symbolism. She was planting something new where something ugly had occurred. Back in his apartment, David's eyes drifted from the screen to a single, framed photo on the cluttered floor. It was of him at the groundbreaking of his first major deal, decades ago, smiling, invincible. The dirt on his shovel that day had been just dirt. He hadn't understood that every action plants a seed. The news moved on to the next story. The light from the screen played over his face in the darkened room. Outside, the world was moving forward, powered by the very deal he had sabotaged. He was not just broke. He was irrelevant. The groundbreaking was over. For Aaliyah, it was a beginning. For David, it was the sound of the last spade of earth falling on the coffin of his old life. The silence that followed was the loudest sound he had ever heard. 2 years post-Iridian, the Phoenix Array was a gleaming spine of glass and steel across the valley, a monument to clean energy and cleaner ethics. Aaliyah Carter, now frequently named among the world's most influential people, sat in her new headquarters atrium, a living garden under a glass dome. She was reviewing a proposal for the Carter Covenant, a supplier code of conduct mandating equity audits and anti-bias training for all partners. The humiliation had been metabolized into systemic change. Her intercom chimed. "Ms. Carter, a package. It's been through security. It's personal." It was a simple, unwrapped cardboard box resting on her assistant's desk. Inside, nestled in plain tissue paper, were 2 items. First, a vintage, exquisite crystal decanter, filled with water so clear it seemed to hold light. Second, a folded note on heavy, expensive stationery that was now slightly frayed. The note read, "Ms. Carter, this water is from the natural spring on my family's former estate in Beaumont. It was once a source of pride. It is the cleanest thing I have left. I have spent 2 years in silence, as you said true remorse requires. I have nothing to explain. The man who did that to you was me. Not a version of me. Not a stress man. My privilege, my arrogance, my unexamined prejudice, that was the core. I broke it open and it ruined me. I deserve the ruin. I do not ask for forgiveness. I write only to say, I see you. I saw you that day, drenched and dignified, and I chose not to. I see you now, building what I tried to break. The sight is the only punishment I need, and the only grace I can perceive. There is no signature. I have no name you should need to remember." Aaliyah held the decanter up. The water caught the atrium sunlight, casting tiny rainbows on her desk. It was an apology in a form she could respect, tangible, clear, and without a plea. It acknowledged her power absolutely. He was not asking to be let back in. He was admitting the door was forever closed because he himself had set the fire that burned it down. She placed a decanter on a shelf in her office, not as a trophy, but as a relic, a reminder that even the clearest water could not wash away a past, but it could mark a point where the poison stopped. That same evening, David Reynolds walked out of a nondescript community college night class. He was auditing a course on ethics and modern business. He participated in no discussions, but he listened. He wore a plain jacket, his face partly hidden by a cap. As he walked to the bus stop, the town car long gone, he passed a newsstand. The cover of a major business magazine featured Aaliyah, with a headline, "The Architect of Tomorrow." He did not buy it. He simply looked for a moment. There was no bitterness left in him, only a hollow, quiet awe at the sheer scale of his error. He had tried to diminish a giant, and in doing so, had erased himself from the map. He got on the bus, took a seat in the back, and rode into the anonymous night. He was a ghost, but he was, for the first time, a ghost who clearly saw the world of the living. Aaliyah, meanwhile, ended her day in the atrium garden. Marcus found her there, looking at the newly placed decanter. "Shall we have it tested?" he asked, ever protective. She shook her head. "No, it's just water. The gesture is what matters." He has finally understood the transaction, which is, that day, he thought he was trading water for power. He was. He just didn't understand the currency. He gave me the moral authority to build an empire. He got—" She gestured to the decanter, the recognition of his own emptiness. A painfully fair trade. She turned away from the shelf. The covenant proposals look good. Let's implement them. And set up the meeting with the Youth STEM initiative. That's the future. This, she said, with a final glance at the crystal, is just a closed account. The chapter was not just closed, it was archived. David's silence was his only meaningful contribution. Aaliyah's work was her only meaningful reply. The world, captivated by her rise, had largely forgotten him, but in the quiet of her office, on a shelf among awards and blueprints, a vessel of clear water stood, a monument not to his shame, but to her unassailable victory. The dainty water had long since evaporated. What remained was pristine and entirely in her possession. 5 years after the Viridian, the Carter Covenant was not just policy, it was industry standard. The story of the drenching was taught in ethics seminars, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a masterclass in strategic response and the market cost of bias. Aaliyah Carter, now a legendary figure, was giving the keynote address at the Global Business Integrity Summit. The hall held thousands, with millions more streaming live. On stage, she was elegance and absolute authority personified. True power, she spoke into the hushed auditorium, is not the ability to humiliate. It is the ability to transform humiliation into a blueprint for a better system. In the third row, a young black woman named Chloe watched, her heart pounding. She was a rising analyst at a major firm, and she carried the memory of 100 microaggressions, being mistaken for the admin, her ideas credited to white junior colleagues. She clutched her notebook like a shield. After the keynote, a select group was invited to a reception. Chloe, through a mentor's connection, was among them. She moved through the crowd, feeling both inspired and intangible, until she found herself near Aaliyah, who was surrounded yet somehow created a space of calm. Summoning every ounce of courage, Chloe stepped forward. "Ms. Carter, your story, the incident at the restaurant, it's the reason I applied for the Covenant Compliance Officer role at my company. It showed me that dignity is a strategy." Aaliyah's gaze, which could be so daunting, softened. She saw the fierce, nervous hope in Chloe's eyes, a reflection of her own younger self. "Tell me," Aaliyah said, gently steering them to a quieter corner. Chloe's story spilled out, not one dramatic bucket, but the slow drip of assumed incompetence, of being overlooked. "Sometimes," Chloe confessed, her voice dropping, "it feels like fighting ghosts. There's no one thing to point to, just this atmosphere." Aaliyah nodded. The bucket was simply a crude manifestation of the atmosphere you breathe every day. It made the invisible visible, and once something is visible, it can be dismantled. She leaned in. "You are not fighting ghosts. You are auditing a system, and you have the Covenant now as your tool. Use it. The man with the bucket gave us all a weapon. Don't be afraid to wield it." Meanwhile, in a small town hundreds of miles away, David Reynolds sat in a public library, using a computer terminal. His hair was gray, his clothes simple but clean. He was preparing materials for the weekly business ethics workshop he facilitated for nonviolent offenders in a reintegration program, a court-mandated community service that had become his only tether to the world he once ruled. A participant, a young man named Leo, scanned a news headline on his phone. Says, "Hey, Aaliyah Carter just pledged another $5 billion to minority-owned green tech startups. She's a machine." David didn't flinch. He had learned not to. "She's an architect," he corrected quietly, his voice bearing the gravel of hard-won humility. "A machine performs a function. An architect envisions a world that doesn't yet exist and then builds the tools to create it." Leo looked at him, curious. "You sound like you know her." David met his gaze, the ghost of his old arrogance completely exorcised. "I knew of her. I made the career mistake of a lifetime by not truly seeing her. Now, we all get to see what she builds." He turned back to the whiteboard, drawing a simple ethical decision tree. "Let's focus on the cost of not seeing people. Leo, it's a cost that compounds forever." Back at the summit, Chloe felt a shift within herself. Aaliyah's words had transformed her anxiety into resolve. She wasn't just an attendee. She was a successor in a lineage of resistance. As the event wound down, Aaliyah was presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Holding the crystal obelisk, she didn't speak of her own accolades. She looked out at the sea of faces, finding Chloe's. This is not for me. It is for the Miguel who deserves a chance. For the Chloe who challenges the atmosphere. And, in a strange way, for every David who provides a catastrophic example that forces a world to change its rules. We do not build monuments to the storm. We build better shelters because the storm came. The applause was thunderous. Chloe clapped until her hands hurt, tears of pride in her eyes. She was no longer just fighting ghosts. She was part of the architecture. David, logging off the library computer, saw a final screenshot of the award ceremony on the browser's homepage. He looked for a long moment, then closed the window. He felt no ownership, no connection. He was simply a witness to the legacy of his own worst moment. It was a legacy of light, and he was forever in its shadow, a silent, solitary monument to the cost of blindness. 10 years to the day. The Viridian had been renovated, its old bones now housing a sleek, non-profit incubator called the Wellspring, funded by the Carter Global Futures Fund. The grand opening was a glittering event, but the tone was one of purpose, not just prestige. In the very space where the bucket had been poured, a beautiful, kinetic sculpture now stood, clear tubes where clean water perpetually flowed upwards, defying gravity. Aaliyah Carter, the guest of honor, moved through the crowd. She was a stateswoman now, her influence woven into the fabric of global business ethics. She paused before the sculpture, its gentle, rushing sound a peaceful exorcism of the past. A young journalist, granted a rare interview, asked the inevitable question, does being here, where it all happened, bring back the pain? Aaliyah smiled, a serene, powerful expression. Pain is a visitor. Wisdom is a tenant. This space isn't about what was taken. It's about what we planted. The most fertile ground is often what's been broken. Across the city, in a modest apartment, David Reynolds watched a live stream on a tablet. His life was one of quiet routine, his community workshops, his small garden, his endless private atonement. The grandiosity was gone, stripped away like old paint. He saw the sculpture, heard her words. He felt not regret, that was too active a sentiment, but a profound, settled understanding. He had been the breaking. She was the harvest. It was a natural order. At the Wellspring, Aaliyah concluded her remarks. A decade ago, in this spot, someone tried to use water as a weapon to make someone feel small. Today, we launch a space where ideas are watered so they can grow tall. That is the only revenge that matters, outbuilding them. As the applause faded, she performed the ceremonial opening, cutting a ribbon made of interconnected links, symbolizing community. The cameras flashed. The story had its perfect ending. But life is not a press release. As the crowd mingled, Aaliyah slipped away from a security detail for a moment of quiet, stepping through a side door into the incubator's serene indoor garden. The air was sweet with the scent of soil and greenery. She was not alone. At a small bench, tending to a pot of resilient orchids, was a head groundskeeper. He heard her step and turned. It was David, time suspended. He was older, softer at the edges, his hands soiled from honest work. He wore simple khakis and a Wellspring staff shirt. There was no shock in her eyes, only a deep, assessing calm. She had known, through Marcus's meticulous briefings, that he had applied for the groundskeeper position under a vetting program for rehabilitated nonviolent offenders. She had approved it, without comment, not as forgiveness, but as a final, clinical severance, letting the consequence become just a job. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. No words passed between them for a long moment. The sounds of the celebration were a distant murmur. The orchids are thriving, she said finally, her voice neutral, observing a fact of the universe. They are, he replied, his voice quiet, stripped of all pretension. They like the light here. Another silence. He did not apologize. She did not absolve. Every meaningful thing had already been said by the sculpture in the other room, by the decade of consequences, by the life she had built and the life he now led. The irrigation system for the vertical gardens, she stated. It's efficient. Yes, it uses a closed-loop reclamation process. Not a drop wasted. A small, almost imperceptible nod. Water, reclaimed. Not wasted. It was all that needed to be said. She turned to leave, her emerald blazer a whisper of movement. She paused at the door, not looking back. The phalaenopsis by the eastern window needs less direct sun. He glanced at the orchid in question, then back at her retreating figure. I'll see to it. And she was gone. David returned to his orchids, his hand steady. There was no catharsis, no dramatic closure. There was only a woman who had transformed an ocean of malice into a wellspring for millions, and a man who tended the flowers in its garden. The world saw a hero and a villain. The truth was both simpler and more complex. They were both free. She was free from his hatred. He was free from the illusion that had birthed it. Back in the main hall, Aaliyah rejoined the celebration. A young girl, the daughter of one of the new incubator founders, presented her with a drawing, a stick-figure woman holding a bucket that was watering giant, smiling flowers. Aaliyah took it, her heart full. "Thank you," she said. "This is exactly right." The story that began with a bucket of dirty water, thrown to humiliate, ended with a child's drawing of one use in nature. The circle was not closed with a clash, but with a quiet, profound correction. The lesson was etched not in David's shame, but in the thriving garden that grew in spite of it. The final, satisfying click of justice was not his fall, but the fact that she no longer thought of him at all. They tried to drown her power, but she built an ocean. If you believe in stories where dignity wins, subscribe for more. Like this video if a victory was satisfying. Share it to spread the message that true power cannot be humiliated.